Hello, the purpose of this training is to review 504s, IEPs, accommodations, and modifications. Students with disabilities may have one of the following documents: a 504 plan or an individualized education program, commonly referred to as an IEP. 504s are part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. 504s prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability by any program, including public or private schools, that receive federal funds. Section 504 defines disability as a person who has an impairment that substantially limits the student's ability to perform one or more life activities. When eligibility is determined for a 504, the team must look at all three of these prongs to determine if a student is eligible. Students who receive 504 plans may have disabilities such as asthma, diabetes, or they could have been exited from EC and no longer require EC services, but may still need a accommodation plan to meet their needs. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, commonly referred to as IDEA, is another federal law which governs special education. IDEA entitles eligible children with disabilities to the specially designed instruction and individualized services and supports they need to benefit from a free public education. You'll notice here that IDEA entitles students to specially designed instruction. This is what sets an IEP apart from a 504, and that there are certain services that a student would receive, be it academics, social emotional skills, behavior goals, things like that. There are 6 principles of IDEA, and those include a free, appropriate public education, appropriate evaluation, an individualized education program, least restrictive environment, parent and student participation in decision making, and procedural safeguards. In just a little bit, I will talk a little bit more about these components. Eligibility for special education services has a 3-pronged test. First, the student must have a disability. Here at Socrates Academy, we have a school psychologist on staff who does many of our evaluations. In addition, we work with doctors' offices to get necessary medical information. We have our PT, our OT, and our speech pathologists who also provide important information into determining if a student has a disability. Next, the student has to show an adverse impact on their education, meaning that the disability is hindering their ability to access the grade level curriculum. And lastly, the student has a need for special education services. So they have a disability, it's impacting in a classroom, and they need additional instruction to meet their needs. Once eligibility is determined, then the IEP team will develop an IEP. This addresses the student's unique needs and individual strengths. Specific goals are developed, be it for academic, life skills, speech, etc. And then it provides students with a disability access to the general education curriculum. And part of that is providing accommodations, any assistive technology support they may need, personnel, and of course special education services that they would receive with one of our EC teachers. Here's a side-by-side comparison that shows the differences between a Section 504 plan and IDEA, which will be an IEP. The commonalities are that both identify some sort of disability and they will provide accommodations. The difference is that an IEP will show a need for special education and related services. Eligibility for special education services is determined through a multi-tiered system of support, grade levels, meet in data teams to discuss their current data and make database decisions for interventions. Should a student not make progress in interventions, the team may decide they want to refer to EC. Also, at any time, if a parent has concerns, they may also make a referral to EC. If a student is determined eligible, then an IEP is developed. However, there are times when students are not deemed eligible, and at that point, the team will look to consider Section 504 eligibility, or it may be that the student just needs long-term classroom interventions. An important component to developing the IEP is the determination of least restrictive environment. The law says that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled, meaning that to the maximum extent possible, we want to have students with disabilities in the regular education classroom. And when we do have to remove students, the law requires that removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only when the nature or the severity of the disability of a child is such that education in a regular class with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So you see that there's a high standard that if we're pulling a student out of class, it is because the instruction just cannot take place in the regular education environment. This is an example of a continuum of student needs. So along the bottom, you see that it starts the general education classroom and then all the way to an alternative location. So at the bottom, we would have consultation and only accommodations, and that usually occurs for students who have made a lot of progress and are on their way to being exited from the EC program, or maybe they need to stay in, but they only need consultation every so often. They don't need to be pulled from class. If that does not meet a student's needs, then we look at what can be provided in the classroom. Through co-teaching, we are able to have a regular ed teacher and a special ed teacher in the classroom working to meet the needs of the students. If being in the classroom does not meet the students' needs and they need additional support outside of the class, then we look at the resource room where our EC teachers pull students for a certain amount of time to get specially designed instruction. Lastly, if academics are at such a rate that they're not making progress, they're multiple grade levels below, or their behaviors are severe, then we would look at self-contained, but that is few and far between. For the last section of this training, I would like to spend some time discussing the accommodations and modifications. There's a difference between the two. Accommodations do not reduce learning expectations. We're not changing the goal of the lesson or of the standard, but rather we're providing a student with access to the general curriculum and assessments through some type of change. And we will discuss in a few moments examples of what that looks like. Modifications, on the other hand, change, lower, or reduce learning expectations. This is what we try not to do with students as much as possible, because it will increase the gap between achievement of students with disabilities and expectations for proficiency at grade level. Accommodations are selected based on the individual student's needs and what has been used consistently for instruction and assessment as documented in their IEP or 504 plan. We don't have a list of accommodations that we give every student with a learning disability or every student with a 504 plan. It's simply, what does the student need and what do we have documentation on that has worked for them in the past. You will find accommodations in the IEP, and this is what the chart will look like. It's on a page that has the least restrictive environment, and underneath it's going to have the general program participation. And you can see for this student, there are none. It lists everywhere that the student goes, and then there are no accommodations necessary. In a 504 plan, you will see those on the first page. That's all that the 504 plan is going to have in there, so you can readily see that. So for the next few moments, I'm going to speak about very specific accommodations that you may come across either in a 504 or IEP. The first type of accommodation is the change in setting. This changes the location in which the student receives the instruction, participates in assessment, or the conditions of the assessment setting. An example could be an individual administration. So if a student is highly distractible or has behaviors that interfere with the testing, their testing and the testing of other students in the classroom, you'll see that they may have a one-on-one administration. If their attention or behaviors are not quite that severe, but they still need a smaller group setting, you'll see oftentimes small group, no more than 10 or 12 students. The next accommodation is a change in the time or scheduling. So this will provide additional time to complete assignments and or assessments, or it could be the way time is organized. Examples of this include extra time. Students may receive frequent breaks. They may be tested at a certain time of day, or they may be given multiple test sessions. So frequently you'll see that a student may have an additional 30 minutes on a test, or maybe after every reading passage they'll take a break, or after 15 minutes working on a math test they'll be given a break. This is extremely helpful for students who need time to process or write because they have physical limitations, or maybe they're using an assistive technology device and need additional time for that. It's also beneficial, like I said, for students who have limited attention and also for students who have low energy level. There are also accommodations for presentation, instructional or test materials presented in a different manner than standard print. The most common presentation accommodation you will see is tests that are read aloud. Usually these are math tests read aloud, science, social studies. We do not read aloud reading tests. The last type of accommodation is modified work or test. This is instructional or test materials presented in a different manner. Examples include guided notes, where students get a copy of the notes ahead of time for them to either follow along with or to fill in the blank. Students may also receive shorter tests, a word bank, or their assignments may be chunked. Chunking occurs when students are given portions of the assignment at a time. So if you are giving a 3-part assignment, you would give the student the first part, check for understanding, the second part, check for understanding, and then the third part. If the student has chunked assignments, you would not give them the entire assignment all together for them to do at once. Thank you for taking the time to view this brief training. Please make sure that you follow up by looking at all the IEPs and 504s that you have to ensure that you are providing all the accommodations necessary. If you have additional questions or concerns, please contact me and I will be glad to discuss any of those questions or concerns.